They tried to go with me having a party yesterday. Yeah, he was gonna come over. You think you were gonna sneak away?
See, I go, you can't.
Pashur, there we go. He found the right one. How many elders and deacons does it take to get the sound right? Numbers 3. Probably my fault. I set it all up this morning. I won't blame Marty. So 2. It's me and Chad. I think we're good, Chad. Thank you. But we were introduced to this character named Pashur, who was a chief governor, and he had had Jeremiah placed in stocks, and he was struck. And then we looked in the story where once he was released, he was brought before this man, and he probably didn't expect Jeremiah to be as bold as he was. But Jeremiah, when he came to him, he told him, your friends are going to be terrorized, face the sword, they're going to be carried away. All the wealth, all these things of life that you cherish so greatly in this life that you think is perfect, in a life that's not following God, is all going to be taken away. And then he tells him directly, you and your house are going to go into captivity in Babylon. And not only that, but he tells him, you're going to die there and you're going to be buried there. So again, the boldness of Jeremiah to continue to speak, and as we mentioned last week, it reminded us of the apostles when they were arrested and told not to speak, and Peter said, well, we ought to obey God rather than men. And then we looked at, as it went on, Jeremiah begins his prayer there in verse 7, and we got a few verses into it. Looking in verse 7, he's talking about, he kind of brings his pain and confusion and his complaints and all those things to God, and he needs answers, he wants answers, and we know that God will listen to him. And sometimes, as we've mentioned in our study of the prayers, there's not always a direct answer. Now, many times when people would go to God, he would answer them directly, right? Or he may give them a hint of what was to come or reveal something to them, maybe not verbally, but something would be revealed to them. But oftentimes, as we've seen in this study, there is no direct answer. And sometimes I think we have to find that ourselves, and we see that with many of the people here, and Jeremiah's no different. But he talks about in the first few verses about God being stronger. You are stronger and have prevailed, He's saying, I couldn't have overcome this. I couldn't have walked away from you if I wanted to, because you are stronger. But then he mentions all the things that he's facing. He says the derision that he faces daily, the being mocked by everyone. It was probably pretty harsh and demoralizing, and something that would be very hard to face every day. Has any of you ever worked in a toxic work environment where you dreaded going to work every day, where you don't have to shake your heads for what you're doing now, but we've been there, haven't we? And sometimes it's not necessarily the entire work environment, but it could be certain individuals or certain groups of people or even leadership, And I know a lot of times with our company, we question some of the things that come down to us that we're told to do when none of these people have talked to our customers or dealt with what's going on in our store. So the questioning of that, we could see where that would kind of ride hard on Jeremiah and his mindset. And as I mentioned last week, he talked of being isolated. I speak to the people, they're over here, but I'm isolated away from them. And that was difficult. At times, I'm sure that was a relief and maybe a sense of escape for him. But he goes on and talks about the day to come, the truth and the consequences that'll come. And those prophecies, again, they made him very unpopular. When we asked the question, how did the people feel at that point? Were their lives difficult at this time? Probably no more difficult than normal life is for anyone else, but they were probably fairly prosperous. They probably had what they wanted. They didn't have need for anything, but what were they lacking? What's the worst thing for us to lack in our lives? God. And that's what they were lacking. And so they weren't suffering yet. Did they think it was coming? They didn't want to believe it was coming. Even Pashur told Jeremiah that it was not coming. This issue had yet to come. It was not going to come. But Jeremiah said it would. So them hearing that for an extended period of time, I'm sure they got tired of listening to it. How when we dread things, do we want to be reminded of them every day? It's coming. It's coming. Again, I think I kind of used the, talking about maybe facing a surgery or facing something that you don't really want to do. If we know it's going to be bad, sometimes we're like, we just want to put it off. And then at other times we say, what? Let's get here and let's move on beyond it. And I don't think that the people here could understand the moving on beyond it. Everything was fine now. But again, Jeremiah faced a lot of negativity. And then let's go back and look at verse 9. And this is where Jeremiah, he kind of reaches, I don't know if we'd call it a breaking point, but he starts praying for strength here and some boldness, and he basically needs a lot of God. He said, well, nobody's listening to me, so I'm just not going to what? I'm just not going to mention his name anymore. I'm not going to say it anymore. I'm not going to do it anymore. And I ask the question, have we ever felt this way? Maybe frustrated if we've dealt with someone we've talked to, really couldn't get any point across. And we talked about, would it be more difficult for us? Or was it more difficult for Jeremiah here? We're speaking of the good news. Was his good news was what? You're going to have to suffer first before you see anything good out of it. So his challenge was definitely great. And then the latter part of verse 9, he says, but his word was in my heart like a burning fire shut up in my bones, and I could not hold it back. If he didn't continue, Jeremiah knew what? What was going to happen with him? He would what? He would perish, right? This was his duty and this was his charge, and he knew from the beginning that it was not going to be easy. But he was a bit overwhelmed mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally, by all these things. He was overwhelmed, but the Spirit of God was strong within him. And where we closed last week and where we'll pick up is in verse 10, because he says, for I heard many mocking, fear on every side. Report, they say, and we will report it. All my acquaintances watch for my stumbling, saying, perhaps he can be induced. Then we will prevail against him, and we will take our revenge on him. So, what's one thing that's very important if you want to overcome someone who's doing something wrong? You better know everything you can about them, right? What happened to Jesus when he was traveling about? Did the Pharisees, did they want to know where he was? Did they get reporting back of where he was? Okay. But more importantly, we want to know where he's at, and we want to know, what'd you say? What's he saying? We want to know what he's saying and why. Why did they want to know what Jesus was saying? If we can find that one thing, right? If we can find something that we can use against him. And did they do that? Ultimately, did they do that? Well, Jeremiah is saying the same thing here. Here, these people that are around me, they're mocking me, fear on every side, and they say, report, and we will report it. And then he mentions his acquaintances, and I think last week I said, usually when we see the word acquaintance, it's normally someone we would associate as a, as an ally or a friend, but not here. And here we have what would be threats of revenge or hopes to persuade Jeremiah not to carry the message that he's carrying. And sometimes they probably would attempt to persuade him with words, but if that doesn't work, what are we going to do? We're going to force him to stop talking. And where was he when we began this chapter? What was he in? He was in stocks. He was being held as a prisoner, being punished. So here we see this, what Jeremiah is facing. So as we continue on, and we'll go through the rest of the chapter this morning, we see that there is confidence that Jeremiah has in the Lord. Look at verse 11. But the Lord is with me as a mighty, awesome one. Therefore, my persecutors will stumble and will not prevail. They will be greatly ashamed, for they will not prosper. Their everlasting confusion will never be forgotten. So Jeremiah does have confidence. I mean, he credits God as the awesome one, and that one is capitalized in the Bible to point that out, that it is a reference to God. God is the creator of all, and And, he was a guide to Jeremiah to do this. And in the very beginning, Jeremiah's calling in chapter 1, verse 18 and 19, he was given the promise of deliverance. Now, the promise of deliverance sounds good. What's the problem with that? It's kind of the same promise for us. We have a promise of eternal life. Where does the hard part lie? Between now and then. So this promise of deliverance sounds good until you figure out what you're going to have to go through and what you're going to face. And Jeremiah probably didn't fully comprehend that, but he saw it. But he understands. He said the persecutors, they're going to fall. They're going to stumble. They're going to be ashamed. They're not going to prosper. Again, we think about the message that he gave to Pashur there in the beginning. This everlasting confusion will never be forgotten. Perpetual shame, something that they'll be remembered by. And it's something that should be remembered by future generations. Now, I'll ask you this question. With all that they're going through right now, did they have any remote example, somebody they could have looked back to that said, we're not going to live like this. We're not going to do this. We're going to follow God. He has led us to the land of promise, and we're not going to turn our backs on Him. Did they have an example of that to follow at all? They did. Was there any reason they should have forgotten what their people had went through, what God's people had went through? Why not? Why should they have never forgotten what the nation went through? And we're talking about the Exodus, obviously. The Passover. All of these feasts, all of the things that were in remembrance, but especially the Passover. Because what happened? You put the blood on the door, and the destroyer is going to what? It's going to pass you by. That saved them. That blood that they had on their door saved them. Never forget it. And then all the times, all the feasts and all of these days of dedication, all these things they were doing were to remember. And they had gotten away from that. And we do that every Lord's Day, don't we, in remembrance of Him. What if we decide we're going to do it once a month? Well, what about once every quarter? Because, Steve, it sure takes a long time to do this every Sunday. I was told that one time by a friend. Man, do you know how long it would take us to do that every Sunday? How late? What time we would get out? Not sure that's what I would be worried about. Same thing, the remembrance of Christ. If we don't partake of that every Lord's Day as we're commanded, we'll forget. Those things will happen. And that's what kind of in our country, we're kind of facing a lot of this cancellation of things that happen. And a lot of the things that we remember that happened, were they good? Our nation's been through a lot. Every nation has. There's a lot of bad things that go on. But why do we need to remember those? We like putting the bad things away. So you don't repeat it. If you erase history, you're doomed to repeat it. And you'll forget. The people here have forgotten.
It wants to be remembered and it wants to be appreciated. When he came to plans the 10 lepers, just that one, he said, where's the rest of them?
Yeah.
He wants to be appreciated.
Yeah, when only one returned to thank Him for healing, the rest of them had gone on. So always remember, do not forget. They had those examples. And Jeremiah recognizes as God as the one who had done that for them. But it should be remembered. They should have remembered everything that happened to them during the Exodus, how not to act, how not to be. Because the ones that rebelled against Him back then, during the Exodus, what happened to a lot of them? Well, we see some that were burned with fire. We see some that were bitten by snakes. We see others that were totally consumed by what? The earth opened up and what happened? Swallowed them up. Now, in their defense, and I don't like defending them, We don't like to defend people that are against God. In their defense, why would they have gotten away from this? Or let's just say, let's don't defend them. What would be the reasons why they've gotten away from it? One of them, you could say, what? The edge to it is gone because it happened when? So far back. You know, how many generations would it take for that to happen, for it to be dulled and forgotten? Obviously, they weren't being taught generation to generation. Now, were they probably still observing all of these things that they should have been? But what could it become? Just a habit. We show up, we're there, and when it's over, we leave. And that's it.
Not for the right reason.
Paul warned about that, in the Corinthian letters. They're talking about them taking it in an improper manner. They were using it wrong. We can fall into that too if we're not careful. And another thing we see was these other nations and their beliefs and their gods and creeping in, and we see that over and over. So they weren't remembering what had happened in the past, and they were acting like they didn't remember. We want to be remembered, but not for something like this. We want to be remembered for following God to the letter. All right, as we go on in verse 12, look what Jeremiah says. But, O Lord of hosts, you who test the righteous and see the mind and heart, let me see your vengeance on them, for I have pleaded my case before you. Sing to the Lord, praise the Lord, for he has delivered the life of the poor from the hand of the evildoers. So Jeremiah there says, basically, God can see what? He can see all. He can see everything. He can see the spirit of man. He knows the spirit that are within them, the spirit that's within us. But Jeremiah prays for God's judgment, doesn't he? He says, hey, we need this vindication quickly. And how do we know he wants it done quickly? What does Jeremiah say? It may be it may be the same mindset that many had when Christ said, I'm ascending to my Father, but I will return. Many at that time, they wanted to what? They wanted to see his return, right? Now here Jeremiah wants vengeance and justice, and he says, let me see it. I want to see it. So we definitely know that that's what he wants. And then when we look at verse 13, I mean, that sounds like a psalm, doesn't it? You know, praise to God, God will deliver, singing praise to God. So when we get through verse 13, it's a pretty easy understanding, but when we get to verse 14, there is a big transition in the mindset of Jeremiah. And it's almost very difficult to read, and it's hard to understand too when we see it, because we read up to this point and he knows his struggles and he knows his trials and he knows the things that are going on, and he's talking to God and he says, let me see the vengeance on my enemies. And then we're going to see this transition into, basically, he turns into the weeping prophet here, and it sounds very familiar to us, and we're going to reference some other parts of the Bible as well. But let's look at verse 14. It says, cursed be the day in which I was born. Let the day not be blessed in which my mother bore me. Let the man be cursed who brought news to my father, saying, a male child has been born to you, making him very glad. And let that man be like the cities which the Lord overthrew and did not relent. Let him hear the cry in the morning and the shouting at noon, because he did not kill me from the womb, that my mother might have been my grave, and her womb always enlarged with me. Why did I come forth from the womb to see labor and sorrow, that my days should be consumed with shame? And in reading this, and when you read through 14 through the end of the chapter, you almost think, well, this should have been at what part of this text? Where should it have been? It should have been at the beginning, and then we go through it, and then he praises God at the end and realizes it. But what does it tell us about Jeremiah? What does it tell us about him? The struggles he's going through, are they harsh? This isn't just a simple idea of someone disagrees with you, okay? This is just on a level of, at every opportunity they're going to mock him, at every opportunity they're trying to silence him. They've already jailed him, they're going to do it again, but at some point, I mean, do you think they've talked about, well, the only way to silence him is how? Kill him. Do you think that's been discussed? Is that something they've thought of? You know, if you disagree with your enemies, what's the easiest thing to do? Well, just take them out. And we're seeing that a lot in our country today. It's bad. Every direction, the hatred and the things that are going on. But Jeremiah here, he kind of just finally calls out and curses his birth. And it's very important for us to understand that he did not curse God and he did not curse who? His who? What'd you say, Hannah? His parents. Why not? Why didn't he? Would he have committed a crime had he cursed God? Very much so. What about his parents? A crime punishable by death. So you can't do that. You can't curse God. He doesn't want to curse God. He doesn't want to curse his parents, so what does he do? Curses what? The day he was born. Who does that sound like? Job. Job said the same thing. You know, and he curses his birth just like Job, and if we have time, which we're not going to, but we see that in Job as well. And we'll see that time. But you know, this is not the only time we've seen something like this, where he's in a bit of despair. We saw it in chapter 4, verse 19, in chapter 9, verse 1, in chapter 10, verse 19, and then also we looked at chapter 15, verse 10. So he curses his birth and just the despair that he's going through. In those, he may have just been in despair. But it's interesting the way he words this when he gets in a little bit further down. He says, not just the day I was born, but even the messenger that brought the news that I was born. That takes it to another level, right? Cursed be the man that brought the news that should have brought what? Joy and happiness. I mean, when we think about today, when children are born, who's the first one that comes out after the baby's born? Dad comes out and sees all the family. Yeah, we're going to see that. We got several that are going to see that. But comes out, and there's happiness and there's joy. And Jeremiah says what? No, there should be no joy. You know, he kind of compares it to the cities that God had overthrown. The news was not good. You know, and then I like let's see, let me find that. Oh, he said, let the man be like the cities which the Lord overthrew and did not relent. It wasn't easy. It was a bad scene, no mercy, great slaughter, destruction, you know. And so Jeremiah, like Job, may have felt like it better if he died than face the hardships that he has ahead. He's already faced some, but is he past them? Is he beyond them yet? No, there's still more to come, and he's going to see it. And then he says, if I'd never seen it, it would have been better. Again, while this feels like it was maybe a transition to gloom again, and that, you know, he feels like God is not with him, because he knows he's open again to being mocked and ridiculed. We have to go back to the very beginning when keeps wanting to say Job, when Jeremiah told the Lord what? You're stronger than I, and you've prevailed. So Jeremiah knows that he's human, and with us comes what? We have strength, but we also have weakness, and we're going to have these moments of weakness. And then the good thing we hear is we don't see a direct answer to this from God to Jeremiah, but in the very next chapter, at the very beginning of it, it says, the word comes to Jeremiah again, and what does Jeremiah do with it? He delivers it. So Even though he feels this despair, he knows that he still has work to do. You know, when I started thinking, you know, it sounds a lot like Jesus when he was praying in the garden before he was arrested and before he went through the trials that he went through. Knowing what he was going to face, what did he ask God? If it's your will, let it pass. And that made me think about that with Jeremiah. So we'll go through, we just have a couple minutes left. The lessons we learned from this, obviously God hears and answers, maybe not directly, but Jeremiah knows there's no one else he could go to, right? He had to go to God and ask him this. And again, we don't see a direct answer here, but in a lot of it, Jeremiah answers his own questions, and he'll answer them again. And again, we go back to chapter 1. Jeremiah was told that it would be difficult. And we face difficulties too. But what's one thing that the walk as a Christian in this world, what does it help us with difficulties and challenges and sinful things? What does a Christian walk help us do? Gives us strength to do what? Do the right thing, to avoid them, to go away from them. Before we began that walk, it was easy to fall in them. Now, does that mean the temptations are not there? Are they ever going to go away? They're not. And the devil has that power that he will try to find our weakness.
It's hard to imagine Satan would be in heaven.
There'll be no temptations, no trials, no problems. And that's what we want to see. That's where we want to be. And we feel emotions a lot of times similar to Jeremiah. I know we do. You know, and again, as we mentioned earlier, we have the gift of Christ to share. Rejection, you know, it's pretty hard to understand why anyone wouldn't believe it, but we see where Jeremiah's anguish is really great. And again, it was the same for the apostles. They faced the same thing, didn't they? The same challenges. But we know Jesus is the Lamb of God that went to the cross for us. And we know the Holy Spirit is the one that guides us, and we see that with Jeremiah, how he knows the Spirit of God and God's voice is with him. And then, as much as anything, we'll close with this, the importance of knowing that your pains and struggles, we can share them with God. And sometimes when we lay them out there, we're just like Jeremiah. We say what? I'm asking you for help, and I want to see it. I want to feel it. But sometimes we need to rely on each other as well. Jeremiah didn't always have that. We know there were probably people that were with him that believed him, that believed in God and knew what they were facing, but he seemed isolated most of the time. But that's not us. We're not isolated. So we'll stop there. Is there any comments or anything else? All right. Thank you for your attention.